Very good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Today, we are in the day two of the International Dental Genetics and Clinical Diagnostics 2023 Chapter 2 conference, and already you have had good experiences with the previous lectures. Now, I present to you a very interesting lecture from Dr. Gia NJ. So, let me introduce my guest, and then we will have the insightful session from Dr. Gia. So, Dr. Jia Inje is a board certified nephrologist and an active physician researcher with more than $1 million of grant funding from the National Institutes of Health and foundational grants. She is the founder of Published MD, where she coaches clinicians on how to publish research papers, build authority, and achieve their academic goals without the overwhelm. You can follow Dr. Gia on YouTube on her channel named as Published MD for a lot of her insights as well as on LinkedIn. So, hi Gia, thank you so much for being here today, and it's an honor and pleasure to have you on this platform of IDGCD 23. And we are all ready to hear from you the fantastic session that you will be delivering.
All right, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here. So, today I'm going to talk about career as a physician researcher, mainly the do's and don'ts. The reason we chose this topic is because it seems like a lot of people hear about what physicians do, and then you hear these people, doctors who become researchers or clinicians who become researchers. What do they do? How do they get there? What is the path? How do you get started right? So I want to give this high level talk so that you're not going blindly, and at least you have some idea of what this means. Okay? All right. So the agenda today, first, introduction on my path, how I got there, what is a physician researcher, the pathway and skills, the do's and the don'ts, and then finally we end with a short Q&A session. So I put this quote here is because I want to share when we do something, it needs to be tied to a big goal. And my goal is to help improve the lives of 10 million patients. And I like to start here because I went into medicine initially is to help patients. And I love clinical care. I see one-on-one patient, I see them, and then I can impact one life at a time. But I felt like it wasn't enough. So I started going into research. And because research, when you publish a paper, you help move science forward, you can maybe help hundreds of thousands of patients. Then as I started doing this, I felt like, oh, maybe I can do more. And so I started publishing YouTube videos and make content to help people, other researchers who want to publish a paper, so that if I can help 10,000 or 10 1,000 doctors or clinicians publish their papers, that means 1,000 times 1,000, then it becomes 10 million patients. So always when you start with a new career goal, it is important to start with what is my ultimate goal. That way you align your clinical work, your personal life, and also your academic goals together. So now, what is a physician researcher? So, physician researcher is a concept you see more in North America, but it doesn't mean that in other countries you can't have it. But typically, what you have the physician part. You still work as a doctor, one-on-one patient care, and you also work as a researcher, one-to-many patient care. And you typically see this position in academia, not in private practice. So not somebody who opens their own clinic, they won't be doing research. And the job scope varies depending on the job. Clinical work, research work, and administrative work. And depending on the job, sometimes you have 75% clinical work, 20% research work, 5% or 10% administrative work. And then some, maybe in a big university hospital, then it may be reversed. Like, oh, this person, they want you to focus on research. You're very good at it. You can move science forward. Then you'll be doing a lot more, like 75 to 80% of research, and then 20% of clinical work, maybe 1 or 2% of administrative work. So it's not like a one size fits all. Each job position changes. Now, I want to briefly talk about academia versus pharma because this is also another path where a physician who does research may end up going as well. Because academia means you go into university, and some people they don't want to get into that path. They want to go into pharmaceutical companies that has more money. So on the left here, academia. So what's the difference is in universities, the researcher decides, designs, and they plan the project. So you have full control of the topic you care about. Then the issue is you have to obtain funding to fund the project, because who's going to give you money to do the project? Here is where people write grants to get fund, to get staffing to fund the project. And how well the project is run depends entirely up to the researcher. So if the researcher has great skills, can get things done, the project will get, you can finish the project, and then you can publish many paper. But if the researcher has poor organizational skills, poor clinical skills, poor research skills, then the project goes nowhere. And in academia, you still retain some clinical work. And then on the flip side, on the right, is pharmaceutical companies, where here, you have the big Merck or Johnson and Johnson. These are companies that will hire sometimes doctors, researchers who are skillful, maybe masters and PhD, and then they decide the project. They design the project. They plan the project. And the company will provide the funding and the staff, and it is run like a well-oiled machine. So basically, they hire people to fit into that role, and your goal is to execute the project based on what the company wants. It's still very rewarding, and these people get paid very well. The downside is you don't get to control, and it's just whatever the company decides on type of project. And a lot of them, you give up on clinical work. Right. So now let's talk about pathway. How do doctors or clinicians, it can be dentists too, get into the research path? So I'm going to share my timeline, but there are many ways people can go into this. First, medical school. I am an IMG, so I took 5 years. And then I served in my own home country in Malaysia, internship and medical officer. And then I decided to do the USMLE, to come to the US and did internship and residency training. That took 3 years. So these are still purely medical training. And then I went to fellowship to do nephrology fellowship. At that time, I joined a program that had a research fellowship at the same time and did my master's all together. So that took 3 years. And then after that, after graduation, I got a faculty position as assistant professor. That has been 3 years now. And so I'm at this point in my institution, I'm due for promotion for associate professor. So just to show you the timeline, medical school training is separate. And the research part really starts only when I started the master's degree. So this is a really important quote, is finishing your degree is only the beginning. So even though it could be medical training, when you finish, you think internship is easy, you're learning again. When you become a medical officer, you're still learning. When you become a resident, you're still learning. When you become a fellow, you are learning. And even attending and consulting, you're always learning, because there's always somebody better than you, and there's always something new to learn. So you must never stop learning. So now I want to quickly talk about how research is different from clinical care. The first thing is research requires a completely different skill set from clinical care. This is very important because doctors who graduate and they join institution and they say, oh, I like teaching, maybe I want to publish a few papers, and they can never get it done because they never learn the research skill set, thinking that, oh, medical school is enough. It's different skill set, so you need extra training for that. Number two, you will need to create your own structure and milestone. So clinicians, it can be dentist, it can be doctor. Your schedule is a set time. It could be 8 to 7, 8 to 5. You see patients in a clinic. You just need to really show up there and patients come in. You see one patient at a time and you move on. But research, it can go for a long time. And if you don't plan it well, it could go a year. and you don't create your own milestone, and a year goes by and your project doesn't move, and nobody keeps you accountable. The only person who keeps you accountable is yourself. So people who go into research needs to know how to take control of their schedule, create their own structure and milestone. Number three, in patient care, the currency is how many patients you see. The more patient you see, the more money people get. The more patient you see, that's how you get your salary. In research, the currency is publication. So every time you publish a paper, that is exchange for a grant. So to grant means funding for research. So to get research funding, you need to show that, oh, I have published paper, I've moved science forward before, I can finish my project, and now let me apply for grant and money so that I can do a bigger project. So that is the currency. And number four, both are very impactful. Okay, research, the scale of impact is larger. That means you when you do one paper, you're helping one in 100 and 1,000, but you don't see the impact fast. It's much slower. So people who go into research needs to have that patience. Like, okay, I know you don't see change happening now. You just have to keep pushing, and later, maybe 5 years later, you see, oh, this whole shift of research is moving in a new direction. So it's impacts larger but much slower. Okay, so let's shift gear on the do's and don'ts to becoming a physician researcher. So first, let's talk about mindsets. A researcher is someone who wants to move science, so they typically ask a lot of questions. How can this be better? What can I, we people say this medicine is the best, but is it really the best? Is that too many side effects? Is it complicated? They are always asking, how can this be better? Or what's the problem? They always want to solve the problem. They see a problem, they don't just say, it is what it is. They would try to solve the problem through research. Next mindset is takes full responsibility, and that comes back to you have to create your own milestone because nobody keeps you accountable. Number four has drive and purpose, because moving science usually is not directly related to money, and the impact is slow. You need to have a big drive and purpose to move this forward. If not, a lot of obstacles can come in the way, like rejection, paper rejection, and that itself can stop you. So people, if you want to become a physician researcher, actually even just a researcher, you need to think long term, and the goal must be really big. Number five must be persistent. As I mentioned, you go through rejections, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And finally, it has to be ethical, and even small things like making sure you publish the paper when you have spent 2 years doing a project, that is considered ethical because you put a patient at risk to go through your study, and then you just give it up. And that technically that's not ethical because you make them go through the risk, but not have any benefit of improving science. Now, some habits. What habits physician researchers should do? First, I think I mentioned this so many times, create your own milestone and structure. I can't emphasize this enough because the people who fail in research are people who have not taken charge of their own schedule. Number two, always learning continuously. So to give you an example, when I finished my master's, we learned research techniques, but you're not going to learn every single thing under the sun because you can never stop doing project. So you learn as you work. So this project, I don't always do the same type of project. I try to, okay, this one, I use this method. The next one, I want to push it a little bit further. So each time you're trying to try a different technique, and as you're do some self-learning. Number three, resourceful. Know how to find solutions. So once you become a physician or a clinician, it is no longer I have medical school teacher telling me what to do. There's a curriculum. You have become an adult. So people who are very successful switch this mindset very quickly. They know how to find the resources. They look for the library. They look for the internet. They know how to find the answers and find the solutions. So when you start switching from a student to a person who is doing their job as a clinician, switch this mindset is the habit I see makes somebody really successful. And finally, good time management. Because a clinician researcher, you have clinical work, the research work, and administrative work, learning how to craft your time so that you're not bleeding, you're only spending 90% of administrative time, or when your main job is a researcher but you spend 3-4 hours a day calling patients. There is a time and place, but you know how to separate that properly. So those are mindset and habits. And finally, this is the real thing about real skills you need. I think I mentioned earlier, a medical or clinician has different skill set as a researcher. So first thing, clinical research methods, study design, sampling, the whole study of clinical research methods. A researcher needs to know, need to know data and statistics. Third one, really important, scientific communication. So it's not just talking about it, presentation, but everything, writing, publishing, collaborating. So these are scientific communication. And also, finally, sometimes even taking your research paper and write it into a layman so that more people have access to your work. The fourth skill, project planning. So this is a skill that even during my master's program, people don't talk about it. I've spoken to PhD students as well. They get a surprise when they finish their PhD and having to start doing their own project. They realize that, oh, nobody had guided me on project planning. Basically, you need to think about money, funding, timing, people, resources. How do I make sure the whole project gets done? This 5-year big project, how do I make sure everything gets executed? Because ideas are really cheap. The goal is in the execution. So project planning is a really important skill. The fifth one is networking. So research is not a solo endeavor, it's a collaborative work. So if you don't believe me, read any of the research paper, you don't see one single author. Typically it's a whole group, maybe 5-7 people, because it is more efficient that way. You get better ideas that way. Each person contribute to different parts of the project, and that's why a very important skill in research is networking. So the question I get asked, do you need additional training? So technically, yes, there is two paths, self-learning or formal degree. So if for physician or clinician specifically, sometimes you don't need additional degree if you're not going to go full research. Like for me, I am a 75% researcher. So I do a lot of research. So a formal degree would be better for me, like master's or PhD. But if you are like 90% clinician and maybe you want to do one or two projects, 10% only, 10% of research, then self learning may be good enough. There are many courses that are free on Coursera and Upskill. And these are many courses that are given by big institutions at a low cost or free. And YouTube, I have learned so many things from YouTube. Anytime there's a new technique I want to learn, anytime there's a new study method, any statistics, I go on YouTube. And finally, sometimes there are specific online courses. But at this time at the beginning, just start with YouTube, Coursera, and Upskill. Okay, so who do you need? We talked about what, and the third recipe is who, right? So I like to think about all our relationship, not just in research. You need the plus, you need the equal, and you need the minus. So you need somebody who's bigger than you, who is your mentor. So that is the plus. And collaborators, people who are same level of you as you. And then the third one, mentees. So they are younger than you. So somebody you're guiding. It is important to have all three to become a well-rounded person. So let's go to the left box, which is mentorship. The mistake I see people is they try to find one perfect mentor, that elusive mentor, the person who can guide me in the whole research and become a doctor too, and has the time and has the right skill. You're never going to find that. Okay, so you need multiple mentors. Each person has his role. I have one mentor for research design, another mentor for clinical trial, another mentor for writing, and you can also have coaches, books. So don't limit yourself to one. And if you expect only one mentor to do that, it's just too much for them. It's the bar is too high. And second point is there's no perfect mentor. So every mentor has their own style. They have their own strength and weaknesses. So I choose my mentor. And if I find that they are weak at this, I no longer get their advice on this. I push more on getting advice specifically on what they're good at. The third point is mentors are boosters. They're not going to solve your problem completely. So what I mean boosters, they bring you to the next level. So they bring, if you are mediocre and you're terrible, they maybe can bring you from mediocre to average. If you're an average person, they can bring you from average to good. Then good to great. But if you're great, they can bring you to extraordinary. So a lot of times you don't expect them to go bring somebody from mediocre all the way to extraordinary. So even though you have a mentor now, what you need to do is always build your skills so that your mentor can bring you from the next level to the next level. Okay, next, the middle column, collaborators. So, as I mentioned earlier, successful researchers don't do it alone. In fact, if you see the most prominent researchers, they come in groups. So they have like AKI group, this group, and they have data sets ready. One person doing data, one person doing statistics, one person's always writing, and they switch around. It's just the same group, and they keep having papers coming up every year, multiple every year. Second point about collaborators, it is also good idea to not think about that little group, also think across discipline, because I find that when you learn from other people, they have more interesting ideas. Because sometimes my projects that I learn from a different field, they have maybe done it before, and so I borrow it into nephrology, and people's like, wow, this is so innovative, but actually I just borrowed it from a different discipline. The third point is actively seek collaborators. As you become a highly educated and become a physician or clinicians, collaborators don't just pop up organically. You actually have to actively seek for them. So how do you look for them? I usually have a little session block in my week. Is let me see what are the latest papers that I want to that are interesting, and then I'll see who are the authors. And after a while, I'll try to engage with them through either LinkedIn or Twitter, just to get to know them. After a while, then you know who is within your field and within your niche, and then you get to know them. So it needs to be quite active, not just passively. Finally, on the right, mentees. So you don't need this so early in your life, but later in the career, because it is very rewarding having mentees. First, you pass on your skills. Second, it revitalizes your love for science, because if you have done this for a long time, it feels like, oh, I haven't improved. I didn't do anything new or exciting. But if you do, when you start having a mentee and then you teach them, wow, I actually progress so much, because mentee usually don't know that much yet. And so you feel like I can actually see the progress in your life. And that is really rewarding for a mentor. So now let's briefly talk about the don'ts. So first thing, don't do this alone. It's not just about the collaborator too, but also having a community. So a community of writers, a community of researchers. So you have a community so that when you have obstacles or you have problem, you don't feel like, oh, I'm the only one feeling this. Or if my paper got rejected once, you think that is the end of the world. And then you have a community that hear, oh, this is normal. My paper, this researcher who is very famous had 5 rejections for this particular paper. So you need to have a community so that you know things are not as difficult. Second point, don't fear rejection. When it comes to research, rejection is the norm, because in a journal, they get so many submissions in a day, they screen 80% of papers get rejected first round. Okay, so that is the norm. Second thing is, if you are never getting rejected, means that you're not aiming high enough. You're probably choosing a research paper that is very low impact, not that difficult, and so that it got too easy to get accepted. So there is a nice fine balance. But if you're always saying, you know what, I'm only going to go with a safe bet, that means you're never going to get published in a higher impact journal. The third one, don't neglect physical health. So this is really, really important. I want everybody to focus on this. As a researcher, even also as a clinician, your brain works really hard. And so brain works well only when your physical health is taken care of. And think about writing and thinking. You need to have enough sleep. You need to have a proper meal, not too much, not too much carbohydrate. If not, you get too sleepy. So really focus on the physical health. If your physical health is not taken care of, your mind is not going to work well. So that's really important. Okay. Next, don't do this without a roadmap. And because it is never really shown how to get this, I'm going to give a cheat sheet from idea to paper blueprint in the next page. But don't do this without a roadmap. The next point, don't ignore academic writing. So people think going to research is just, they love the research part, the science, and then they think about writing. Oh, that is so boring. Why do we have to do that? Academic writing and publishing the paper, that is the final product. If you don't publish the paper, all your 3 years of worth of research work will go to waste and you have nothing to show for. So people who are really successful researchers spend a lot of time writing because that's really important. Think about it. You do all this, you want your research to go to the world, right? You don't want it to hide in your basement. You don't want to hide it in your lab. You want it outside. So academic writing to get that final piece out, that is really important. The third point, do not try to get grants before publishing paper. So grants are, we're talking about, bigger grants, getting money for researcher. They always want you to show your credibility. You need to prove that you can do projects first. You need to prove that you can do write a paper before you can even ask for money. So I like to use this analogy of getting grant before publishing. It is almost like you ask for it is almost like you're asking for a Ferrari when you don't even have a driver's license yet. So you always need to get a driver's license first before you can even get the nice fancy car. Uh, Finally, do not rush through the research process without thinking. So I've seen this so many times, especially clinicians who do not have much research training, is that, oh, I want to start data. Oh, this is a very interesting question. They ignore all the preparation step and go straight to data collection. The mistake is once you collect data, you can't go back because you I mean, you can go back, but you have to do everything again because garbage in, when it comes to data analysis, garbage in, garbage out. So if the data is not collected properly, just the study design is not well, the however beautiful the paper, your English could be the perfect, the paper looks perfect. If the method is wrong, everything will go to waste. So the research process, the study design is really important. So this one, I'm going to put it here for 5 seconds since it's recorded. If you want a blueprint, you can use this link. It's like a PDF 7-step process to bring you from idea generation to paper publication. I won't talk too much about the study design because that is very variable. Right. Final 2 points about mentoring because we get a lot of questions like that. On the left, do communicate with your mentor. Don't ghost them. Okay. So I've seen sometimes they get busy and then they don't respond back to their mentor. That's a big no because it shows that you don't respect them. Next, do take initiative. Don't wait for your mentor to bug you. Hey, do you have your paper? Hey, have you done this yet? Hey, always give them update. You can always take initiative and say, oh, I have this project. This is what I want to do. I have started this. Take initiative. Third point, open to feedback. Okay, make sure you are always when somebody's giving your mentor is giving you feedback, take it. If it's too hard for you, sometimes you may need a day to process it, but be open to feedback because that's how you improve. Next, be consistent and reliable. So this is similar to communication as well, but what you want to do, you're always working to improve. And then when you say you're going to do something, do it. Don't say I'm doing something and then you disappear. Finally, do respect and be respectful of their time because mentoring is free, is a volunteer work. You don't be entitled because they may not need to choose you. Good mentors only want to choose good mentees. So if they chose you and you are not respectful of their time, they don't have to be your mentor anymore. Next, the one on the right, don't keep them in the dark. So if you have something going on, tell them, oh, I'm traveling this week, so I won't be able to communicate with you. Oh, I've started a project. This is the update. Oh, I'm having issues. Talk to them. Okay, so don't keep them in the dark because they can't read your mind. Next one, don't be afraid to ask questions. Sometimes I find that new mentees, they're always worried about asking me because they feel like they may sound dumb, but that's not the case. If you ask a lot of questions, I feel actually more reassured that they are trying their best to work and make sure it's correct. So research accuracy is really important. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Next, do not hide your mistakes. Be honest. If you have made a mistake, you have to admit it. Oh, I made a mistake in this analysis. So this just happened to me recently. I realized we missed three people in the sample size. It means what? It means I had to tell my mentor I made a mistake and I had to do the entire analysis again. And that means we took extra 6 weeks to complete the paper. It is what it is. We are researchers. We have to be ethical. We have to be accurate. We have to be truthful. And so if we make a mistake, we have to be honest. Next, finally, don't expect a mentor to do the work for you. They're only here to help you guide your way. So you are still the person. Think about this way: a mentor is somebody who can put. It's not somebody who can start your car, but if you are starting the car, they can add more gas, and then you can go faster. Okay, so I'm gonna pause here for any Q&A, and you can follow me on Twitter or YouTube or Instagram for more content related to clinician and also academic writing and clinical research.
Thank you, Gia, for that wonderful session. Um, we don't see a question, specific question here on the chat, but you have got a lot of lovely messages. So everybody finds this an interesting session, an important session. So lots of good positive comments that we have received through this session, and. Just before you go away, I just wanted to ask you one question.
Mhm.
Like, for example, like you have given a very clear, roadmap for through this session. But when sometimes, for example, if a student who is an undergraduate student, or as you mentioned, like as a postgraduate student, so when somebody doesn't have any clue about how a research paper would be or how to start a study design, so what is that, uh, you know 2 3 tips or maybe a one point aspect that you can suggest where the students can start their journey, because it's important, like as you said, that it's important to start. So what would be your suggestion in this case?
I have a nuanced answer. At when you're still a undergraduate, this is a time to explore, and I wouldn't recommend you go like deep into the topic yet. Okay, what you want to do is actually go look for people who are researchers, and you see what they do. You want to know how. Do you even want to research your life? Is that something interesting? You want to know how it's like before you jump into a course, because learning something without a true outcome, you can never remember. I don't know about other students, but I can only remember. I will only put in effort if I know I'm getting something out of this. So I won't just learn because of the sake of learning, hoping maybe 10 years later I might use this helpful. So I think at the graduate, sometimes before you even dive deep into the topic, really start seeing finding mentors who are a researcher, who may be something that you want to be, and just ask them and say, can I learn how your day is like? Your day to day. What do you actually do? Sometimes I think that's even more important than doing the skills. And then once you feel like you like that, now this is the real skill you want to go. Two parts. One is read the research paper, not to understand the full content, and just understand the structure. And actually, the research paper tells you everything in the curriculum of a master's and PhD program, because the introduction is about finding, asking questions, finding the research gap. creating a research question. In the methods, this whole study design, patient population, data and statistics, that is like a whole 3 semesters of schoolwork. And then the results, how do you analyze results? That's also a whole semester. And then discussion, how do you think about comparing literature, hypothesis, coming up with argument. So that's the high level thing to see. But without proper guidance, people can't extract that sort of information. So I would recommend just kind of see and understand, oh, there's some structure in research paper. And if you really want to do clinical research design, then Coursera will be a place to go where you just say, oh, I want to search a clinical research, and that's where people go step by step on study design. Sorry, that I know you asked for one sentence, but it's a whole paragraph of answer.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that clarity. And I think this session would be really helpful for everybody who are either trying to start their research career or who are already into it. And probably, people got access to approach you. So I think that was fantastic. Thank you, Gia. Thank you so much for this
My
session.
pleasure. Thanks for having me. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.